not know until we learn about it. Sometimes media cannot help but inform us about truths that we question until confirmed. Hispanics, we were told, were welcomed into America and courted by the Democratic Party to ensure future support. Now we read that Hispanics are trending toward the Republican Party. Is this to be believed? When I read this article, I had to share my report. This is Addi Banks, and this is my report. Why the Latino vote is a growing problem for Democrats. Okay, so why is the Latino vote a problem for Democrats? This Yahoo News article by John Ward, Chief National Correspondent, on May 3rd, 2022, reads, a series of recent polls indicate that Latino voters, long a reliable Democratic bloc, are becoming more Republican ahead of the November midterms. A Republican Senate aide heralded the numbers from a Marist survey last week showing 52% support for the GOP among Latinos and just 39% of support for Democrats, while a progressive writer voiced skepticism about the results of just one poll. And while it's a good rule to look at aggregate polling data rather than just one survey, especially one like the Marist poll, which has a huge margin of error and a small sample size, the numbers are generally in line with a greater shift. Latino voters are trending away from Democrats. Quote, if you look at things like the Texas local elections, the New Jersey elections, Nassau County elections, the Virginia elections, they all point to Hispanics not just not snapping back, but continuing to get more Republican in relative terms than they were before. This is a quote from David Shore, a leading political data analyst on the left, at a recent panel hosted by the Citrin Center for Public Opinion Research at the University of California, Berkeley. Shore was ticking off the different electoral contests that have taken place since the 2020 presidential contest, when Hispanics' support for Joe Biden was 8 points lower than it had been for Democrat Hillary Clinton in 2016. That trend is continuing, said Mike Madrid, a Republicans consultant from California who has worked for the anti-Trump Lincoln Project. Madrid told Yahoo News that, quote, there is absolutely a rightward shift among Hispanic voters. I've looked at it very, very closely, he said. The shift has been happening for some time. He said the Hispanic voters in California and Arizona have bucked this trend, but that it shows up everywhere else in the country. And he said it's as much a class issue as it is anything else. Okay, but can we get to the whys? He said, the largest divide in America is the education divide. Democrats are rapidly consolidating college-educated voters, and Republicans are consolidating non-college educated voters. The Democrats are not helping their case. The problem is they're becoming an out-of-touch elite party. The Republicans are winning this by default. They haven't figured anything out. They're focusing on their white, non-college educated base, and they're gradually getting Latina voters. I question if this is really the case. Shore echoed this point in his opening remarks at the panel in California. Quote, I don't think it's a coincidence that the two groups of people that we've really lost ground with are working class white voters over the last 6 years and Hispanic voters, he said. Shore argued this, saying, the Democratic Party has become much more liberal since 2012. And over the last 4 or 5 years, liberals have for the first time become the dominant factor in the Democratic Party. From 2012 to 2019, the Pew Research Center found that the share of Democratic voters who identified as liberal went from 37% to 47%. And the share of Democrats who identified as moderate or conservative went from 57% to 49%. Among other commonalities, Shore said, working class white voters and Hispanic voters tend to be more religious and less likely to identify as liberal. I think we're getting somewhere now. But now, some real reasons. The article cites that increasing alienation of Hispanic voters from the Democratic Party stems from several factors, according to those who have studied the issue. Inflation is a top concern for many Hispanics, according to a March survey by Ipsos and the Marxist poll that shows a 2-to-1 advantage among Latinas for Republicans over Democrats on who can better address the rise in prices. Americans generally also give Republicans the upper hand when asked which party can improve the economy and reduce crime. In 2020, Hispanics moved toward then President Donald Trump based on his push to reopen the economy during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. According to a study done at the end of 2021 by ICWA Research, a 3-year-old polling and research organization focused on Hispanic Americans, ICWA also found that Democrats were not responding to attacks on their candidates in Spanish language media, especially in places like Miami and South Texas. Republican ads calling Democrats socialists were particularly effective. Republicans didn't turn off the Miami sound machine after 2016. They turned it up. They didn't stop talking about socialism, says Stefani Valencia, co-founder and president of ICWA. She goes on to say, there's a media ecosystem of online media, influencers, along with Spanish language AM radio, and some conservative TV that creates an echo chamber of messaging. Democrats ran $15 million worth of TV ads in the last month of the 2020 election, but they still aren't countering this echo chamber effect in Miami, Valencia told Yahoo News. Quote, there is no voter in South Florida that remembers any of those ads, but they're still probably tuning in to the radio station that's suggesting Joe Biden is not president. Working class voters of all stripes have been alienated, as well as by the language that Democrats use, according to a recent study conducted by YouGov on behalf of Jacobin Magazine, a socialist publication. Blue-collar workers are especially sensitive to candidate messaging and respond even more acutely to the differences between populist and woke language, the study of 2,617 voters in 5 swing states found. They report primarily manual blue-collar workers, in comparison with primarily white-collar workers, were even more drawn to candidates who stressed bread and butter issues and who avoided activist rhetoric, end quote. The report continues, progressives do not need to surrender questions of social justice to win working class voters, but certain identity-focused rhetoric is a liability. According to the YouGov Jacobin study that also concluded, potentially Democratic working class voters did not shy away from progressive candidates or candidates who strongly opposed racism, but candidates who framed that opposition in highly specialized, identity-focused language fared significantly worse than candidates who embraced either populist or mainstream language. So, what does that mean? While the study did not specify the specialized identity-focused language likely to turn voters off, strategists in both parties have pointed to the phrase defund the police, which some Democrats embraced in 2020, and the use of the term Latinx. Progressives have promoted the use of Latinx because Latino is a gendered word that technically refers only to Hispanic men, but only about 4% of Hispanics prefer the term. And even among Democrats, there has been a backlash against it. Representative Ruben Gallego, Democrat Arizona, has forbidden his staffers to use the term. Madrid said the use of Latinx perpetuates the impression among many Hispanics, especially those in the working class, that Democrats are out of touch with their concerns. I recognize that this is an important issue because those of us outside of this community did not know this. We believe that the term was inclusive, respectful, to cover the entire community. This is what happens when we make assumptions, a lack of awareness that separates and backfires when we live in a multicultural society and groups are not in sync. So, what do we learn from this article? Do we get a better understanding of Homeland, immigrant populations, and human behavior? I consider the words of Maya Angelou, who said, "We are more alike, my friends, than unalike." Wherever you live, you seek peaceful surroundings that favor your family. The glitch presents when that place is not the home that you own. No place outside of home will put your needs first. Therefore, the struggle for dominance, respect, and acceptance in the face of resentments. Political alliances are tested when we seek to find who you can believe in to bring about the desired outcomes.